Welcome to the Dickinson College Expert Show. I'm Craig Lane. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm joined today by Associate Professor of East Asian Studies, Shawn Bender. Professor Bender, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, you are the author of a new book, and the book is called Feeling Machines, Japanese Robotics, and the Global Entanglements of More Than Human Care.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
That's a heck of a title, right? But it's the first two words that are really interesting to me, the feeling machines, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack here. We're going to talk about robots. But how does an East Asian Studies professor get into robots?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, my background's in cultural anthropology, so that's what my degree is in. And I've spent a lot of time in Japan. The first time I went there was 1992. It's hard to think that far back. And my first project was on a totally different topic. So my first book was actually on drumming groups in Japan.
Like taiko drumming.
Taiko drumming, right? And so I was focused on that for a long time, but all the time that I'd lived in Japan, starting in the 1990s and then into the 2000s, I always had a side interest in tech. And you can't help but not have that interest when you grew up when I did, and when Japan was kind of seen as the sort of pinnacle of technological sophistication. And so I always had that as a sort of side interest, and bought a lot of sort of Japanese tech over the years there, and showed it off to friends and stuff when I got back. And then around the time when I got here, I started thinking more about Japan's sort of future and demographic changes that I'd heard increasing reports about, sort of shortfall of caregivers for a increasingly older population. And I was also hearing a lot about robots and their connections to helping out in that. And so I got very curious in it, and I thought maybe this would make an interesting project. And so the sort of rest is history, as they say. I started researching it.
Gotcha. And how long did the research take you?
It took a long time.
Okay.
So I actually was thinking about it this morning. I thought about this idea in 2006. So this wasn't long after I arrived at Dickinson. And so it had sort of been germinating since that time. And then the first sort of preliminary field work I did was 2009. I had a year grant, 2010 to 2011. That was where I did the bulk of the research. And then I did multiple sort of follow-up trips after that. You know from reading the book that I didn't stay just in Japan, and I looked other places. And so those were in roughly 2014, 2015. Around then, and then back again in 2017. So over that time span, roughly a little under 10 years, and then additional time for writing. So the book came out last year and was at the publisher early last year. So all that time took to sort of do the research and the writing through the pandemic, all that fun.
Yeah, it's a massive undertaking, really. But you tell some really personal stories in this book of people you met, and of course the ways that these machines interact with them. There are two machine examples just in the introduction that we can talk about. And one of them is an exoskeleton that's called HAL, with the allusion, of course, to 2001, where Hal's not such a great actor in 2001. He is the villain. Yeah. So my question there is, what is this HAL exoskeleton like? It's to help, right?
Yeah. So initially, when I was there in early 2010s, right? The robots that people would refer me most to were that Paro, which is the baby seal. I mentioned that in the introduction. We talked briefly about that. And the HAL, which is this exoskeleton. And at the time, they were both sort of destined or imagined to be helpful for older people. So HAL, to describe it, HAL stands for hybrid assistive limb. So not it's obviously an allusion to the 2001 robot, but that's where they get that name from. And so it was imagined to be this exoskeleton that older people could wear and use when they wanted to walk around town as a kind of strength supplement for people who've gotten more frail. In the end, it didn't really work out that way. So as I mentioned in the book, and I believe it's still true, HAL has never really successfully been purposed for that. But what they did find was a sort of repurposing of it for therapeutic purposes, for people who had partial severing of the spinal cord and had become, needed a wheelchair to walk, or their walking had been impaired in some way. They found that they could use that for rehabilitative therapy for those folks. And that started actually in Europe before it did in Japan, in Germany specifically. And so I went to Germany to study how they were doing that. It's since been approved for limited clinical uses in Japan as well, in addition to other countries. I think there's actually places in the US now that are using HAL for those purposes.
Interesting that they were able to pivot, though,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
This is not replacing any physical therapy or the work that's being done there. This is in addition to
That's
it.
right. And that's right. And the pivot, I think, was important. They were trying to find a purpose for this technology. And so it's an entirely different age group. So obviously some older people have this kind of issue, but it can also affect younger people. So the people I met were, sometimes in their 30s, 40s, had been in accidents or something had happened. So they basically exhausted what conventional therapies could do for them. And so this was kind of like, oh, well, we have this new tech. Would you want to try this? Kind of pitch to them in that way. And those were most of the folks that I met had come to that place for that reason.
Fascinating. So that's one example of a feeling machine,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And in many ways, right, an actual feeling machine because it senses your
Exactly.
electrical impulses,
That's
right?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's par excellence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but the other one you talk about
Yeah.
is Paro,
Yep.
which is a baby seal. It
Yeah.
looks like a baby seal.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
like what, like about yay big, and you hold it in your arms?
Yeah. It's about the size of a baby seal doll.
Yeah,
that
okay.
If you ever
So-
wanted to make a baby seal doll, it'd kind of look like Paro.
Your favorite plush,
Your
right? You
favorite
can
plush
hold on
toy.
to it, yeah.
And so, it's supposed to be handheld and something that you can hold in your lap. And it has sensors all over it. So it responds to touch, it has vision sensors. It has sort of microphones in it that respond to people's vocalizations. And then it's all driven inside by a CPU that has particular kinds of early AI technologies that are sort of programmed so that it responds not directly to like a touch or a sound like you would in a sort of classically robotic sense, but that kind of provides a kind of unpredictable way of interacting. So you stroke it a lot, maybe it will respond more, but maybe it won't, in the way that kind of a living thing might, like a dog or a cat. More of a cat than a dog, probably.
Right.
But this sort of programmed unpredictability in it. And then if, say, it doesn't get touched for a while, it might vocalize. It has like a little speaker in it as well. It'll make a little baby seal sound. And then it'll prompt the person to kind of interact with it in some way.
Okay, so it's in many ways it's comforting, right? Because this is given to dementia patients, and they hold on to it.
Right. So this is an application of this tech. So that also kind of had origins which were different from its eventual application. It was imagined more along the lines of an Aibo. I don't know if you ever heard of an Aibo. It was this little robot dog that Sony came out with in the late 90s.
Now that you say
you
this,
might remember.
I do remember this. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was imagined to be something like that, which was like a substitute pet. So the inventor was trying to create a sort of substitute pet for people who couldn't have pets for whatever reason. And then they were actually inspired by dementia care professionals in Denmark who thought, oh, this would be a good use case, something that we could use with our dementia patients. And then it started kind of developing more in that direction. And that's what we know it as today.
Yeah. Wow. So fascinating to me that really, grows out of Japan's technological embrace, but then gets trialed in Denmark and really gets brought to the forefront that way.
Hence the global entanglements.
The global entanglements, right? So just to be clear, these are seen as ways to assist people.
Right.
There's a lot of fear about robots. Yeah. There's a lot of fear about technology in general, especially with AI now, which may not have been the case when you started researching this book.
Right.
But are the folks that you interviewed, are they pushing back on that narrative and saying like, look, we're doing this because we think these things are going to be helpful to many people?
The most criticism I would hear of these robots tended to come from people, from two places. People who didn't know anything about these robots, like people I would run into who were interested in what I was doing, but then also people who are deeply involved in them. So the folks who would often criticize the aims or the intentions of some of these roboticists who were creating these devices were people who were roboticists themselves. Like, this will never work for that purpose. We should actually be going about this in a totally different way. So I actually found the people in the field to be very realistic about the potential of robotics. One of the first people I met was a guy who's sort of famous for creating humanoid robotics. So Waseda University is very famous for its as having a long tradition in creating humanoid robots. I believe it's the place where they created sort of the first sort of usable humanoid robot. And he's like, and I remember going to him like, so how are you using humanoid robots in nursing homes? He's like, we're not using humanoid robots, and we probably never will. I'm like, why? He's like, because it's just too dangerous an environment. It's too unpredictable. What if a robot falls and hurts somebody? Whose fault is it? Is it the robot's fault, the maker's fault, the institution? There's all of these liability issues with it. They're not sophisticated enough to handle people who maybe are hard of hearing or might not understand. So very early on, I saw, okay, so I need to sort of recalibrate in how I'm thinking about this. So I got interested, so what kinds of machines are actually being used? And that led me to those devices. But the machines are sort of changing even more recently. Not so much the AI dimension, although that might be coming, but they're sort of morphing into different kinds of devices.
So really, when you chose the title for the book, you were thinking about the ways that these machines would work with people's natural responses, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think of it as sort of a double meaning of, like, the Pato example of, this is a machine that you're actually touching and interacting. That sort of tactile connection seemed to be a thematic, because these robots are sort of different. Their purpose of their application are different, right? Therapy for people with walking disabilities is very different from therapy for people with dementia. But one of the things that seemed to connect them was this desire to sort of interface with the human bodies, whether that be tactile means, or in the case of HAL, a direct actual electrode that sticks on people's bodies and senses nerve signals that are just always circulating in the body. So that sort of idea of feeling as sensing, but feeling also as touching, is sort of how I was thinking about the title. And the interest was in how can we get, from the Japanese perspective, how is it that we can get these machines that have traditionally been in factories, how can we start introducing them into sort of everyday life contexts? That's sort of like a larger thrust behind the development of these. And so care was one context. Care and domestic context was one thing that they were thinking about. And so these have to be machines that are able to sort of coexist with humans. And so they have to be able to sort of sense and respond to human intentions and behavior. And so that's a complicated story, but that's where I was thinking about. That's where I came up with the title, and sort of thinking about all of those kinds of vectors.
Yeah, the intersection of these things is amazing. So it's fascinating to me, again, that this grows out of your interest in East Asian studies, your time spent in Japan, and then bringing it all together. It's a very liberal arts moment. Right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So what's next? Is there a book after this?
Me?
Or, do you follow this?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it'll be a book, but I'm currently sticking with the topic of robots, but moving in an entirely different area. So looking at agriculture rather than care. Right.
I mean, in agriculture too, industry has been automated.
That's right.
Right.
Increasingly.
And it has agriculture too, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. It has been for a very long time. There's been automation of tractors, of course. But you may have heard recently John Deere came out with a fully automated tractor that's a sort of it's a model. It so far has not been in commercial release yet, but it basically will, harvest an entire field by itself, right? And that's sort of like only a small step from what they can do currently.
Right.
Now they currently still need a human driver, but so much of driving a tractor now is automated. They all have GPS technology in them. So the tractor is still sort of yet to come. So that's not suitable as a topic. So I've been looking more locally at the topic of dairy and the dairy industry and milking robots. So automated milking systems is what they're called.
Wow.
There's these little robots that will go up to a cow and milk it.
Yeah.
And then go away. And so those have been around for quite a while.
Different kind of feeling machine.
Totally different, with the same kind of attributes, right? This is something
tactile, right?
Tactile,
that's important.
Has to sense.
Can't hurt the cow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And so I'm exploring that now, just sort of first steps, trying to look at that. And they use those in Japan as well, so I can imagine a potential comparative project. Whether that will be a book, I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to exploring this area.
Well, we'll look forward to talking about it too.
Thank you.
We really appreciate having you on the program. Thank you so much
to be here.
For being here. Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me.
Professor Shawn Bender, his new book is Feeling Machines, Japanese Robotics, and the Global Entanglements of More Than Human Care. I'm Craig Lane. Thanks so much for joining us for the Dickinson College Expert Show.